Thank you so much for joining me today. This is Whitney with the Yoga Art Space Studio, and we're using technology today to do a nice paint night. We just passed, as of when I'm doing this recording, we just passed the 4th of July, and this was a very interesting year because of the COVID-19. We're all stuck at home, but yet the 4th of July for me was amazing. It was so fantastic to get to see all the fireworks, to see people just so excited to have something to celebrate. And so our paint night tonight is inspired by that, by the 4th of July. Ultimately, we're going to be painting a nice American flag all across the sky, and we'll choose a scene that reminds us of America to be across the landscape down at the bottom. And so you'll want the painting to be this direction, landscape instead of portrait. Now know that in any of my paint night events that I do, please feel free to add any variations, any type of creativity that comes up for you. I'll show you exactly what I need to do to get me step by step through. But that's not to say that that's the only right way to do this. For instance, when we get to the bottom, I'm just going to paint a nice simple tree line so that you get something easy to work with. But if you want to do something that reminds you of America, for instance, some of the national parks have an arch. If you want to paint a nice archway of rocks in one area, or if there's an iconic mountain or an iconic scene where you live, please feel free to add that in, and you can take that absolute liberty to do that. And so we need to start off with a nice background. And so when we're painting today, we're going to need a couple of colors, red, white, and blue. I like the Americana brand just because Americana is a good thick type. You don't have to use this one. You can play with other types. There's cheaper brands that are a little bit more watery, and so the watery nature could be useful for especially this first step, creating the background. There's other brands that are more expensive, thicker, come in bigger quantities. Just choose a brand, you're all good. So red, white, and blue, and also black. Just a teeny bit of black for the background, and mostly for the scene at the bottom that we're going to create. Every time I paint, I always also make sure that I have a nice water source to wash out my brushes right away. If you leave your paintbrushes out and the paint dries on it, you kind of just ruin that brush. There's no way to come back from that. I have a whole big set of paintbrushes. You don't have to have this. I'll show you the ones that I'm using as I go. I tend to use these nice flat top ones for what we're going through today. A wide brush will get us those good stripes that we're going for. And for today, especially when we're getting toward the star portion, we have different ways to make the stars, and I'll show you different options to do to get a variety of star shapes and sizes. But a nice paintbrush will be, or sorry, a nice toothbrush will be a good way to get some teeny little dots going on up at the top. So get your paintbrushes, your water. I tend to use just a nice cheap lid to hold my paint on. You can get as fancy of one as you want to get. Okay, so let's get started. If I'm just working for myself, I tend to put paint directly on the canvas if I know about how much I'm going to use. So for instance, I'll show you right here. I always, you notice I shake up my paint beforehand. This is because paint tends to separate if it's been sitting out for a while, and so that makes sure that you've got a good mixed up variety. Now I haven't used mine in a while, so it's possible that I might have a clot here right at the lid. So if you ever can't get your paint out, yeah, that clot right there. So if you ever are stuck, you can either open it up and just take it out like that, or you can pour it out yourself, or just remove it and then try again. That's when you can tell it's been too long since you painted. Okay, so I'm pouring directly on. Something like that's about a good amount to start with. Not too much, not too little. You don't want this to be like completely saturated because this layer does have to dry before you can move on to the next step. So from here, get a nice wide brush. I'm gonna take this one. It's one of the wider ones that I have, but I'm not picky about which ones I use. So a nice wide brush to start to get the paint all the way across. Now, if you can tell, as I do these first couple of strokes, it's kind of, the canvas itself is dry right now. And so you get these little dots because it's not filled in. And so you want to paint, continue to go back and forth, so that all those dots are taken care of, getting the canvas nice and moist. By the way, the canvas size that I'm using right now is a, let's see, 11 by 14, but you don't just pick a good canvas size. Like it's not important about what size you use. I also always have some sort of a paper background behind me. Usually when I'm at home, I just use newspaper. That's a good way to recycle them. But just to make this video a little bit more clear for you, I've got the just a white background for you. Also recycled paper. It's old flyers from the studio for old events. Now, some people care about the very edges of it. I do care. Not everybody does. So if you're one that's gonna bug you to not have the paint going all the way to the outside edges, take a moment to cover that now. You don't have to go clear to the base edge because that's gonna end up being a totally different color. So once you got that covered though, our strokes more or less stay in this left and right direction. When I'm doing skylines, I go left, right, left, right, left, right. What this does is it ends up looking a lot better. If people are, doing scribbles like that, it looks much more like a little kid painting. And so this left and right is super, super key to being able to make it actually look good, look like a nice skyline. Now notice how I'm getting dry. We're actually going to use later on a technique called dry brush. And so this is what we're going for when you're dry brushing. When I'm doing my first layer on a canvas, that's way too dry to work with. And notice too, I'm starting to run out of some of the paint along the edges. So that's the sign to use, pick up your paint, get a little bit more on your canvas. You want it nice and moist. Again, not too much though, not huge puddles across, just because then it's too much that has to dry later on. Now, as I'm gonna head toward the end doing that scenic America the Beautiful type display at the bottom, for me it's gonna, the lowest point maybe an inch or two from the top, and I'm gonna take a nice V shape for that, just because I love hiking, I love going on hills. So you want to make sure that your blue covers at least to whatever your scene is going to look like at the bottom, whether it's a mountain scene or arches. So, but worst case scenario, just cover all the way to the bottom so you're extra safe. And just keep on going, picking up more paint, going left and right, all the way to the edges if you can. Left and right. Fun step here, just getting it on the canvas. Notice how this layer is looking much better with that thickness of the blue. Now as I'm getting, some of these spots are getting toward the end of this first layer. So as I'm getting to that spot, make sure that your stroke goes all the way across. When you're first getting the first little bits, it's not quite as important. I've got a lot of paint coming over the edge, so I'm just picking it up and using that as well. I'm not one that likes to waste a bunch of paint, but okay, that seems like a pretty good amount. There's a rule called the rule of thirds, where when you divide a painting into a checkerboard, like if you were to put a hashtag on top of it, those thirds, those important points, 1, 2, 3, 4, when you're using thirds of the canvas, the eye, it just looks prettier than if you're trying to make things exactly square, exactly even, which it's slightly difficult here just because the American flag, you know, it's not exactly a third thing, but the landscape we're doing at the bottom can be a third. So make sure you cover up at least to that third point, the third of the canvas at the bottom, and then just keep on covering. And you may need to even go another time or two, just adding more paint. See up here how there's a lighter blue that's just, it's not quite thick enough at that spot. So just keep on adding, keep on going. Eventually, I'm gonna add, to help it look just a little bit more like a night sky. When we get almost at the end of adding in all this blue, I'm gonna start to fade in just a little bit of black at the top. That'll help draw the black color in when we use just black for the skyline at the bottom. That'll help. If you just randomly use only, you know, red, white, blue, and there's no black at all anywhere in the picture, it can make the black that you add at the bottom look like it's out of place. You want to make sure to really keep it at a theme. Good. Occasionally you get little dots like that. For sometimes that can mean that your paint's starting to get dry, probably the case with me. For today, it's not super important because that actually adds texture when we start to do dry brushing later. So that'll be a fun little spot that looks really cool. I'm going to do just a little bit more blue to cover some of these spots. And by the way, the blue that I'm using is ultramarine blue. It's not super important which one you use as long as it reminds you of that American flag, that nice deep blue. Good, so this blue is starting to look pretty good all the way across. Okay. So while the paint is still wet is when you need to blend in that black. So I don't want to use too much black. Black is super overwhelming to other colors. And so I'm going to use, oops, this is the sign right there. That's the sign that you haven't mixed up your paint. So, you know, close the lid, shake it up again. So yeah, black can be very overwhelming as a color, and so it can easily take over this entire skyline. I want the skyline to look mostly blue, not mostly black. And so I'm gonna use this board off to the side to get my black just a little bit. Notice my brush is still full of blue. That's perfect. That's what helps me blend. So then I pick up just at the base of the brush some of that black in the same types of long strokes all the way across. Notice how immediately this got so much darker. So I don't want to pick up much more black than that. So strokes left and right is where it starts to pick up some of the blue and it makes it look not quite so different. And I'm not going to pick up any more black because that was about as dark as I would want it to be. And so instead, all I'm going to do is just continue to go left and right as I slowly travel down. And notice how that starts to fade some of the blue down. Now, I'm noticing it's getting a little dry from the paint already. That's a sign I need to work a little bit quickly, but I'm going to actually add a little bit more blue just to help it out where it's not getting super dry as I'm going down. And the blue, adding it, in this case, since black is such a powerful color, adding that blue is actually really nice too, to make it so that I can blend some of the blue up as well. Good. So notice as you go across, it's starting to look not quite so like that immediately black that was going on at the beginning. So it's looking like, you know, it's helping it out instead. Good. So once I blended it in, I'm still liking the black, so I'm going to pick up a little bit more. Again, just apply it directly at the top. Go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That starts to pick up more of the blue to mix it in. And then slowly drag the black down. I kind of want the black to go not quite to the third line, but kind of heading toward that direction. Picking up just a bit more. Good. And what this does is really make it look like night's coming on. It's like the night of the 4th of July when the party really gets started. Okay. I'm going to add just a little bit more blue for some of these spots over here that are starting to dry out. When you're working on the background, oftentimes going quickly is extremely beneficial to make sure it's not drying out before you want it to. I'm adding in just a little bit of blue or black right across here, but then I'm going to blend it nice and heavy. Good. Yeah, that's looking about what I want it to do. Where it's getting that a little bit of a hint of the darkening sky. Right there is still just a teeny bit too light for the blue. Okay. Last little hints of paint. I'm just going to add a little extra bit of blue down here through the bottom. I've still got, notice you've still got black on the canvas or on your paintbrush, so don't pick up more black. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that background. So now remember, you put your paintbrush in the water. You don't want to leave paintbrushes in water overnight. That would ruin the glue that's on the paintbrush and it would ruin the bristles. The bristles would start to expand outward and they never really get better from there. So for the amount of time that I'm going to be sitting here, it's fine to just let it sit in the water, even mix it out a little bit, kind of getting a little bit of the paint off of it. But you want to make sure to wash your brushes off with soap and water as soon as you can after you're done. Okay, so this has to dry for just a little bit. It's pretty moist, so I would not want to start adding on other touches of paint such as the red and white stripes right now, because the red and white stripes would just turn out to be to pick up too much of that black and blue. So I'm going to sit here for a moment, just shake my other paints out. Literally waiting for paint to dry. I did look up a couple of facts about the American flag. So while we're giving this a little bit longer, so actually, interestingly, before the early 19th century, the early 1900s, there was actually no standardized flag. They prescribed what has to be on it. So the number of stripes, the number of stars, but they didn't necessarily say that the stars have to be exactly in this configuration. And so if you look at some of the different flags from, you know, the 1700s, the 1800s, you can tell it's an American flag, but it wasn't exactly standard about exactly it has to look just like this and the measurements have to be in this proportion. And so because of that, you look at old flags and you'll get a variety of different textures, different lengths for that blue box, different arrangements of the stars, all sorts of stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. So one more thing before we actually start working on the stripes as well is we need to start getting some stars up. Now I don't want us to do the 5-pointed star just because I want the star to kind of give it a semblance of the night sky instead. And so that's an okay step to do because the white is just going to be dotted directly onto it and it'll just dry as that tiny little dot, instead of having to stroke where it picks up this black and blue that's still wet. So I'm shaking up my white. I'm going to put my white over on my little board. And I usually like to do dots about this big, unless I know I'm going to use a ton of paint in that particular color. I start off nice and small, just because I don't like to you know, do a huge amount of a paint and then barely use like a dot of it. Just that I don't like wasting paint like that. So yeah, about a circle about that size is pretty good for most projects. So I'll show you different ways that we can get some of these stars. And let's start off with our paintbrush. And make sure that you're not stuck to your paper too. Occasionally it's nice to pick it up. Make sure that you are still good and clear. That way you don't end up at the end with paper stuck on the back of it. Okay. So, first things first, let's use the toothbrush. So you're picking up a little bit of paint onto the bristles, and then your thumb's going to be what helps to flick it onto the canvas. So we're going to go extra heavy with the stars in this corner because that's how the flag goes. But that being said, I think it's going to look absolutely great if you get just a hint of stars through the rest of it. So your personal preference, if you just want it to stick in the corner, that's great. If I let it go slightly out, I'm not even mad a little bit. So then use your thumb and start flicking some of the paint onto the canvas. So notice how the toothbrush does very, very tiny dots. It's very much like spray paint. So that's just a first little hint. And in fact, I'm really liking this lightness. So that with the toothbrush, I'm actually purposely going to go all around with this very, very light spray. This is like a first hint of stars all the way across. Okay. Good. I'm done with the paintbrush now, or the toothbrush now, so you can put that away. My hands get dirty while I'm painting, so notice how I've already got blue and white all over. You can wipe that onto your papers that you've got. I just know that I'm gonna get wet, so I always make sure I take my rings off, any jewelry, so that I don't get paint on it. And by the way, these are acrylics. And so the good thing about acrylic is you can wash it off. It's water-based. You can wash it off right away if you notice it gets on your clothes. If you let it sit a little bit longer, it's gonna dry like that and you're not gonna be able to get it off. So if you notice it, pause the video, go clean yourself off. You're good to go. It easily washes off of hands though, so I don't mind. In fact, I think it's kind of fun when I get extra colorful and extra, you know, awesome with my painting on my hands. It's almost like a sign of pride for those first couple of minutes. So so that was a good amount for this first initial layer. Now, if there's a couple of things we can do from here. Now my toothbrush is wet. It's different using a wet paintbrush than a dry paintbrush. So I'll show you a couple of dots. If I kind of shake this paintbrush, this toothbrush dry-ish, like kind of shake some of that immediate water off, I'll show you how the sizes is actually going to be different than the dry toothbrush. So I'm going to pick up a little bit more paint onto the toothbrush, and then notice, oh yeah, getting much more of a spray. So that's how it's different working with dry versus wet. So now this is where I'm really going to start concentrating on this corner up here. Good. Awesome. I think that's a great amount for that. I'm putting the toothbrush back into the water. Good. I like how with the water it turned into these perfect circles. Like sometimes when I'm doing galaxies, I like it to be spread across so you have to fling it in a certain way to get a lot longer. In this case, I just want the circles because I want it to be reminiscent of those 50 stars that are on the American flag. So that's pretty good right there. Now I want to add in a couple of more dots that are even larger. And so to do that, pick the back of a toothbrush or the back of a paintbrush up. That circle that's right at the end, that's where you can get a good specific dot. Now notice what I really, really like about using the toothbrush is that it's a random spray. When you use the paintbrush, you're putting the dot onto it, and it's really hard for people to be random. It's like if you try to be random, usually it ends up not random. It looks very even, which could be okay if that's what you're going for, because the stars on our flag are spread across in a very even way. So that's fine if that's what you're going for. But if you're gonna try to be random, you pick up a little dot of the paint onto the end of the paintbrush, and you want to try to make sure that you're kind of going off all over the place. And notice how I did a good 5 or 6 dots before I'm picking up more paint. What that does is it makes it so that the sizes are slightly different. So I'm kind of just hopping around as if I was I'm just jumping right here. Okay, so just keep on going a little bit more. I'm liking how this is looking. And sometimes I'll even kind of try to be like several that are kind of close together, because that's what makes it a little bit, like, notice the spacing of these big ones kind of is turning out to look more or less like I meant it to be there, which again, for the stars and like stripes that we've got here, that's fine. But sometimes you have to like purposely get a couple more that are a lot closer together. But then again, don't make it do that too much to make it look like you're trying to not be random. And you've got different sizes of paintbrushes too. So if I were to get that one that I initially started with, the circle's a lot bigger. And so, you would get a very different size dot. Now, I'm kind of seeing in my own mind where the box itself is kind of tracing out to. It's naturally coming together that way. And so I'm going to emphasize and try to stick within that box. Awesome. I'm liking how that looks. I usually have some paper towels with me so that I can wipe off the ends of brushes. You can always just kind of wipe off as much of the paint as you can onto your paper, and then just continue to clean it off until it looks pretty good in the end. The end part, since it's the paint brush itself that we're usually sticking in the water, the ends we do need to kind of clean up after ourselves right now, because unless you just want to stick the end of your paintbrush in water and use a whole different paintbrush for the next part. So one last little thing I'd like to do here is to make a couple of these stars look like a star that you see in the sky when you get kind of that plus shape. And so I'm going to take an extremely small brush, kind of the smallest that I can find. Let's see, that's a pretty good one right here. Very, very small. Make it wet either by licking it or by dipping it in your water and then kind of dragging it out. So that wetness So I'm going to pick up some of the white. So notice how it's just a teeny little dot. And not on every star, but some of the bigger ones. Do a little bit more up and down. Like a little, like a, you know, a little. And it doesn't have to be just up and down. It can be lots of directions. Just some of those big ones. And they don't have to be all that size. You can do tiny little pluses too. And notice what I just did. I accidentally set my finger onto the canvas. So that's, I'm right-handed, so I usually have my pinky there to kind of set me down, but that picked up the paint that was right there. So that's okay, just do a little recovery with this step that we're doing right now anyways. Good. Put a couple down here. I don't want too much of this step. Just enough to kind of like, you know, shine those stars. Notice it's all going outward from a center dot. So, and I'm not making them all exactly even. Good. Notice how I like how this is happening already, where I've got kind of two up here, two down here, spread a lot further apart. To make it random, I only really want to add maybe a couple more, maybe one up here. And if you start those strokes from the center and go out, it'll help you out rather than starting at the end and then having a lot bigger blob toward one side than the other. I think I'll do one more for this dot right here, and then I'll look back, make sure it looks good. I'm happy with it. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I'm happy there. So then I take that paintbrush, leave it in the water, maybe wiggle it out a little bit, and then we'll clean it out at the end. So yeah, looking really good for this star corner up here. Okay, let's check in with the paint, that bottom layer, see how it's doing. It's, if you gaze at it from the side, you can see more or less if it's dry. If it's, sometimes paints are a little bit more shiny, they have a little bit more of a sheen to it. So sometimes you can touch not really important parts just to make sure it doesn't go up on your finger if you're not positive. Mine's looking great, looking pretty dry to me. So we're ready to move on to some stripes. Okay, so I haven't laid any red out yet, so give me a moment to shake it. Put some on my thing. I might have that same plugged problem, yeah, so I'm gonna have to open it up. Now make sure you don't open it over your canvas now that it's got a lot of important stuff on it. I'm gonna open up away from it. It's pretty wet for me, so I'm just gonna pour it straight out from the bottle. So sometimes it's dry enough that it's easy to take it out. Just so you get the exact colors in case you're curious. The red, I'm using a Santa red. The white is called Snow or Titanium white. And my black is just called Lamp or Ebony black. Again, just pick good colors. If you even just have paints laying around your house that are these colors, just use that. This is just for fun, unless you're, you know, wanting to give it to somebody, then maybe be a little bit more specific. Okay, so we're gonna start doing our stripes all the way across. Now there's two colors to this. You know that there's red stripes and you know that there's white stripes. The flag does start with red at the top, so that's what we're gonna start with. And we do, so when you're working with paint, you saw earlier how, you know, if you're going to clean out the paintbrush, it's very different when you then go into to dipping it in water and then using it again. And dipping it in water makes it extremely hard to do this process that we're going to do called dry brushing. So instead of dipping it, we're going to pick two paintbrushes that are about the same width. And you want it to be, you know, if you get too small of a paintbrush, it's not going to look quite as good for the dry brushing technique, just because you're going to have to work a lot harder to get it thick enough. So get one that's more or less the thickness that you want it to be. Also, dry brushing does tend to ruin paintbrushes sooner than some of the other techniques, and so you don't want to necessarily dry brush on brand new brushes. So if it's a difference of using an old brush versus using a thick brush, go for the older one. That'll be pretty good. Let's see. These two are about the same thickness. I would prefer to be a little bit thicker. Let me see what this one looks like. That's actually a yeah, that's the hard part about working with dots, is you don't want to mess them up once they're already kind of there. Okay, so I'm back to here, getting my paintbrush a little bit drier. I'm going to turn this into a nice big star, since that's kind of what's happened for us. So extra large one right up there. And adding in tiny little dots just to kind of help it recover. Okay, not too bad. Okay, back to my dry red brush. I'm gonna pick up a little bit more red. It's a little bit too dry now. If it's too dry, it doesn't really paint for you, so good, good. I'm liking that amount. And I'm liking that it's kind of more bold toward the center. I like how that looks. You could choose to start from this end and just stroke this way to get it bold toward that spot. You've got some choices here. So that's my first red. I'm leaving a spot, you know, trying to get it about as thick as that one was, and then going all the way across. Notice how that spot right there wasn't exactly as dry as I like it to be, so I'm going to rub some of the wetness off on the paper at the side. Good. What I like about here is that it's tinting the white splashes that we had already. I like how that looks on those stars. It's like turning it exactly into what I wanted it to be. Good. So I'm going a little bit thicker just to kind of recover from that wet spot that I had. But notice I turned it to be more of a skinny direction, so it's more of like a skinny line that's thick, and then turning it white again to go out from there. Okay, pretty good. Okay, getting another dot. Giving some space. Right about here. And mine may not be exactly, you know, the 13 stripes, but it's gonna fade into that landscape anyways at the bottom. And so in my case, that's totally fine. That's exactly kind of what I'm wanting to go for. So as I'm working on these stripes, let's go through another little fun fact about the American flag. I learned that the current flag with the 15 stars, 13 stripes, by the way, our 50th state, Hawaii, was added on 1960s. And so the current flag with 50 stars and 13 stripes was designed in 1958 by a 17-year-old high school student, Robert G. Heft of Lancaster, Ohio. President Dwight D. Eisenhower chose his design out of 1,500 entries. So it's like, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that it was like a competition to, you know, to be the designer of the current flag. So, but that's how, so now it is standardized about, you know, where the stripes go, where the stars go, what the proportion is, all of that good stuff. Okay, so this is the point, this next stripe, where I'm going to start going all the way long. I like this stripe better than this one. This one I got a little bit too wet again, and it's fine. I kind of am recovering by making other ones similar to it, but this one I'm liking how it's turning out by going just long dry strokes all the way across. It's kind of like giving, each time I go across, like adding another little tiny bit of thickness. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. You just want to go until you're happy. This is your design. Nobody else necessarily is going to see it unless you let them, except for you. So if you're happy with it, that's where we're good. Okay, I'm going to go for one more down here. This will be our last ending one. I got a little bit thick right there. It's fine. I'll just cover it up with landscape when we're going through. Okay, I think I'm happy with the red for now. If I need to add more later, I need to make sure that brush is dry again. But here I'm going to pick up that brush I picked out for the white. Same process. Make sure you do not pick up the red because red is stronger than white. And so it will take over that color scheme. So again, this is a softer brush, so I'm going to have to be extra diligent about taking that dryness off. And I'm going to go super light. Oh, yes. That's looking good. That's what I love about white, is you don't need as much to start making that same stark contrast. Very good. I'm going to pick up some more paint. The softer brush, I'm liking that it's leaving longer streaks. That's really nice. Good. Go extra long when you're trying to go all the way across the canvas. If you stop halfway through, you can recover from it, but it doesn't look to me quite as good as if I just go all the way across. Yeah, I'm liking that. Okay. Yes, I think that's just enough of a hint for me that it's looking really good. Okay. So as I'm continuing to look at this star spot over here, I'm not liking how it turned out quite as much. So what I'm going to do to help it recover is actually work on adding a little bit of black to it around those spots. Now I used the same brush that I was using for the white to start adding the black. So notice it's a little bit wet, which I'm starting to notice a little bit of spreading across. So careful that it's not too wet for you. And also notice, because I'm using the same brush, if I'm going back to white again for one last layer on top of this black, I just want to be extra cautious that I have taken all of the black out, because black is way stronger than white. So it will make it look much more funky. Okay, that's starting to look better. I'm going to add a little bit more black. And I'm actually going to have to recover with some of the dots too, just to help it out. Okay, yeah, that whited it out enough that I'm happy with it. And this is a nice example of kind of recovery. This is the best part about acrylic paint. If you don't like something, keep on doing stuff on top of it until you do like it. Now, obviously, it's easier to just be perfect in the background. That's fine. But little tiny moments to recover like this. So I'm going to test it to make sure I did get all the black out. Yep, it's looking pretty good. So then I start at that dot in the center, go out from there. Yeah, that's looking much better than it was. And I'm also going to use the tininess of this brush to add a few more little tiny dots all over here. It's not quite the same as the spray, but you know, if I keep on spreading it out, that'll help it out. Good. Not too bad. It's kind of looking similar to this star over here. And when you've got similarities across, it doesn't look so much like a mistake. So awesome. Pretty happy. I'm gonna go down just a little bit more solid though. There, very good. Okay. So also I'm looking at this dot. I don't like that it looks like the stroke of it goes down and it's kind of in the white section. So I'm gonna use the back of my paintbrush to kind of go over that same dot. Yeah, I like that. Okay, again, wipe the paintbrush off and just keep on going through. If there's spots that you're not quite sure that you like them, go back over it for a moment. There's no, you know, there's no final, it has to be perfect right now or whatever. There's no final. Just keep on playing with it until you're happy with it. Like I said, that's what I love about acrylics. Just keep on adding stuff to it until it's looking really good for you. Okay. So because it's dry brush that we did, it should already be dry almost immediately. So that's great. Easy to work with. So our last thing to do is to start doing some landscaping at the bottom. And again, be creative. If you've got mountains that look exactly like where you live, use those mountains. If you've got a bunch of trees where you are, use the trees. If you've, you know, America is amazing because it's so different from one part of the country to the other. We've got so much variety. It's funny because America is actually quite a bit, like even one state in America, like say New Mexico, Texas, there's many countries. So that's why, you know, you look at pictures of countries like pick a European country, like Germany, Italy, stuff like that. You pick a place like that and there's a very specific landscape, more or less, that is that country. But America has all of it, and that's pretty awesome. Okay, so first things first, we need to cover all the spots that are white down here. This is going to just be our nice solidness down here. Now this is kind of a small brush to do this with. So I'm gonna pause for just a moment. I'm gonna use that brush very shortly, but I'm gonna pick up that brush that I was working with at the first layer. I'm gonna take some of the water off of it. It's okay for the base layer to be a little bit wet with a paintbrush. And then just from here, see how much quicker it is to make those long strokes. So make sure my black's mixed up. I'm actually going to add some directly onto the canvas because this is the dry first layer. And then make sure I get all those edges. Yes, I'm loving how wet this is. So nice to work with. This is one, don't rub the base of your palm in it because then you might get, you know, a palm print of black higher up. It's fine. You just have to find a creative way to correct that. So that way it doesn't look, it turns into a happy mistake instead of looking like, yeah, that was a mistake. Good. Okay. I'm liking how this whiteness that's existing here is kind of already starting to dictate for me part of the shape of this bottom. Again, like I said, about a third is a really just pretty amount for the eye, but I'm really making sure here to cover all the little tiny white squares. So if you notice any parts of the canvas that are not letting itself be coated, go back over it. Okay. So what I'm going to start to do is start working this side up a little bit higher. And this side up a little bit higher. I'm going to have trees on top of it, so I don't have to be exactly exact about getting a nice strict line right there at the bottom. But yeah, just keep on stepping back, looking at it. Okay, what does it need more of? I think I'm even going to let this part go clear up high up here. And dip in the paint some more if you need more black. Notice how black right here at the bottom is not necessarily out of place. It's because this top part makes you see that it is nighttime. It draws it into the pattern so nicely. Okay, I'm kind of liking this. It's almost like, you know, I'm camping, I'm sitting up here looking up at the hills and the mountains. You know, it's got this nice arc shape. So I'm pretty happy right there. So here I'm going to come back to this brush that I had set aside a moment ago. Get just a little bit more paint out for it. And start to do just tiny little upward strokes along the baseline, just to fuzzy it out just a little bit. This is starting to give the hint of trees. And then when we actually add trees, it'll make it look real nice. Good. Okay, I'm happy there. So paintbrush in the water, and I'm gonna go back to my tiny brush. Wipe it off so that way the trees don't get, you know how water makes paint just spread out? We don't want our trees to start spreading out like that. Okay. Paintbrush is pretty good. I like having that teeny brush just to work on the details of the trees. So more or less, trees, there's different ways that you can do them, and there's also different trees. So you might have specific types of trees that are in the area where you live. So that's perfectly fine to try to paint it to that direction. There's no right, there's no wrong. More or less, let's start here in the center. I'm gonna go a little bit smaller in the center and then kind of bigger as I get outward. So more or less something like this. Start off with a nice line through the center and then kind of paint little branches left and right. We don't want them exactly symmetrical, and some can go super far out. It's just kind of, yeah, you can see how I'm just kind of adding in little tiny dots to kind of symbolize all those branches coming out. Yeah, I like how that one turned out. Okay, again with the trees, you don't want to be super symmetrical, so you don't want the exact spacing and the exact height from one tree to another. So with this next one, let's go a little bit taller right here. Let's go extra tall actually. Okay, start to add in some of those details. And trees are not perfect, and you also do not have to be perfect. That's what's beautiful about them, is that they're so different from one spot to another. Okay, I'm really liking that one. I like that a lot. And I like how it ties in just that tip of the other tree that you get to see. Or it's a small tree. You never know. Okay. Now I'm going to work a little bit more on here. I'm right-handed. So now that I've kind of got an idea of what I'm doing over here, I'm going to do some of the same type of design, starting to work from this side. I'm going to start with one clear off to this side, one that's kind of hanging off this edge right over here. Yeah, nice. Okay. Do one right here, a little bit smaller. I kind of like this section of the stars over here, so I don't really want to block off the stars too much. So I'm going to put a little bit more focus on some of the tall trees over onto the other side. Yeah, yeah. Very good. Nice small one right over here. And then just to throw things up a little bit into a different spot, take a tall one right there. And forests don't have the same exact tree everywhere, by the way, so you can have different species of trees. I'm just making this super simple for people here who are complete beginners. Yeah, I like it. Okay. Start to go back to some small ones. I need a little bit more paint. And notice how the branches don't have to be even from one side to the other. I kind of like it better when, say I have one branch that's starting to come off up here, one branch that's starting to go down there, kind of getting both of it going on. Some of these small ones can literally just be a couple of blobs, and then it kind of gives you the hint of something being right there. I kind of did a lot right here, so I'm going to try to help recover just by adding in more little tiny tree tops right here. Yeah, something like that. Okay, continuing across. I'm thinking like nice right there. Time for a big one, maybe the tallest yet. And notice that different types of paintbrushes will add very different textures to the trees. So I'm kind of liking how it is right here, just kind of sticking with the pattern all the way across. But you can switch out paintbrushes, you can play with it. Nothing wrong with that. I like that toward the base, the branches start to get longer and fuller, just because they're heavier. But I also don't want it to block too much of this other tree, the other trees out, so kind of extra thick right here. Yeah. I really like how that looks. Okay, and just add a couple of other little things around to kind of finish, just whatever looks good for you. And this is the best part. Well, oftentimes what I'll do is I'll start, like I'll finish here right now, and then I'll have my canvas up in a place where I can view it for a couple of days. And every time I look at it, I'll kind of like, you know, I'd like to add this over here. I'd like to add this over here. Maybe you do want more white stars all across the sky just to kind of complete it. In fact, as I'm looking at that, that might be actually really cool. You just want to make sure to not, if you get any white at all into the trees down here, you really want to take care of that because the trees should not have stars. That's a little bit not what we're going for. But yeah, so keep on playing with it. Keep on exploring, and more or less, this is our 4th of July. Tree line, America the Beautiful. Just kind of our little symbol of our freedom, just gratitude for what we have. By the way, you can also completely forego things like if you were to say create a design like this again, maybe you want to create an American symbol. So maybe like the Twin Towers, do the Twin Towers across the bottom and the New York skyline. That could be amazing. Or if you want to, you know, that statue after 9/11 where there was, you know, all those military people and the firemen helping to lift up a flag, that could look really great down here at the bottom. So have freedom, like know that you can practice this again. Each time you practice, you get a little bit better. So have fun, explore with it. You know, there's no one right way, there's no one wrong way. It's just, that's what painting's all about, having fun, just getting to be creative. The best part about painting is it's like its own type of meditation where time just disappears while you're sitting here filling in the trees. And that's what I love about it. Time disappears. That shows me that I'm in a different brainwave. I'm in my theta brainwave instead of my normal thinking brain. And honestly, it's from that theta brainwave that true, deeper solutions can start to come to us. It's, you know, it's our dream state. Dreams. Albert Einstein had a dream that led him to the theory of relativity. And dreams can change things for us, whether that's, you know, inventing the newest, craziest things because it came to you in a dream, or, you know, just finding a solution for a problem, seeing a vision of who you can be. All of these are possible when we're not in our normal thinking brain, our alpha beta. So getting a little bit deeper inward, exploring with, it's like the universes that are within us. That's where that creativity lies. So starting to play with that a little bit more. That's what this is all about. It's not about being perfect. It's not about, you know, selling our next artwork for $500 or $5,000. It's not about any sort of pressure. It's about, you know, what wants to come out right now? What wants to come into existence? What can I birth for you? So that's what it's all about. So with that, our painting is more or less over, but just keep on playing with it until you're happy, because it's you that has to look at it for the rest of its existence until you know, gift it, give it away, whatever. And so this is our wonderful paint night. I hope you enjoyed it. There's last little things too, like if you want to check the edges, that can be nice. Sign your piece also. I like to make sure it's completely dry though, so let it dry a little bit and then sign it, and here we are, we made it. Hope you had fun. Bye.